In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? This is the story about when we told my aunt she needed to seek therapy to continue being part of our lives. During the recession, my parents invited my aunt, uncle, and two cousins to live with us. My uncle had lost his job, my parents needed the rent, however little they could afford. My uncle quickly got a job, but they continued to live with us, which my mom was happy to do. Well, my aunt has always been a bit out there emotionally, accusing people of talking about her behind her back, making her husband quit good jobs and moving states randomly. We assumed she was escaping debt collectors, and convincing my grandma to write checks for new car tires every 3 months. She was never mean to me or my sisters though, and was honestly a really good aunt who we loved. While she lived with us, things started getting weirder and weirder. We would come home after dark to her sitting in a dark room crying. She would accuse my mom of turning people against her. I started getting scared she would accuse me of being inappropriate with her daughters. She falsely accused her first husband of raping her. My mom started worrying she would hurt one of us in a psychotic fit. We staged an intervention. We told her that we love her and her family. We said her kids and husband were free to stay, but unless she seeks therapy she couldn't live with us anymore. My mom told her she was afraid she might have Cushing's, grandma had it and it made her crazy, and she wanted her to get tested. We all told her we were afraid she was going to hurt herself or one of us. She exploded. Said mean and nasty things to my parents. Told my cousins, "Look, I told you my sister doesn't love you." She looked at my oldest sister who had my infant niece with her and said, "I would never hurt your child. I don't even know how to break the furnace to make it leak carbon monoxide." This happened about a year ago. I was heading to my dad's house to visit. On my way I passed by a high school, and saw a UFO hovering over the football field. I wanted to get a closer look, so I parked in the school's parking lot. As I got out of my car, the UFO just hovered up into the clouds, and disappeared. There was still enough daylight to see that it was not a toy hoverplane. This happened around 6 p.m. That same day, I left my dad's house at 11 p.m., and I stopped by a Waffle House to read a bit and get a coffee. Again, on my way home, and in the same area near the high school, I saw two of the flying objects just hovering over from afar. As soon as I got close enough to get a good visual, they simply disappeared, as if they activated some sort of cloaking device. I thought I was going crazy, and I didn't believe what I saw. So, I drove back to the Waffle House and went down the same road to see if I could see them again. And I did see them, just floating as before. As soon as I was close enough, they disappeared again. Seeing something like this made me question my sanity, until I told a close family friend that lives near the high school. He confirmed that he did see something weird in the sky that night. I didn't feel that crazy after all. Edit, typo/punctuation. I had a bypass surgery in March. After 2 days in ICU and on very powerful drugs, morphine pump and oxycodone, SP, I was back on the floor for bedtime. All that night, I had an elderly nurse, like 75 or 80, who was butchering my line and had to poke me several times to draw blood. She kept waking me up once I drifted off to sleep. She also had a heavy German or Slavic accent and mumbled/talked to herself. So I asked the nurse in the AM why they had such an elderly nurse working nights. It turns out I had some very intense and realistic hallucinations coming down from post-surgery drugs. My great-grandmother died when I was 6 or 7. That night we stayed in her house and I slept on the couch. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sounds of someone walking through the kitchen. That's where I saw my great-grandmother walk to about 10 feet of me and just stop. I froze in fear for what felt like 10 minutes and she just disappeared. I've been obsessed with the ghost TV shows since. That's the only time I've been frozen in fear. Interesting feeling. Around May 2008, my ex-wife's mom was on her deathbed, agonal breathing and low blood pressure, near death. She'd had Alzheimer's disease for a few years and it had really taken its toll on her. She wasn't expected to last more than a day, but she'd held on for 2 so far. We'd been at the hospital all night and into the morning. My ex-wife had enough and wanted to rest at home. We lived a mile or so from the hospital. When we got to the house, we both saw that our front porch was entirely covered with maggots. Millions of them swarming like the world's most horrible carpet. My ex-wife freaked but powered through it. We walked across them and got inside and cleaned our shoes off. I figured something had died outside and went back out and swept a path down the porch. I couldn't smell anything, but it was definitely gross. After that ordeal, we took a short nap. My ex-wife bolted up and said we had to go back, so we put clothes on and headed backwards out. It had been about an hour. On the way to the car, no maggots. No trace of them. No smashed maggot trail to the door where we'd both stepped. Nothing. We both swore we'd seen them. I am a scientist. I have no explanation for that. I remember my grandma's house in Mexico always had freaky or explainable happenings taking place. 2 of the more notable instances happened on the weekends that I stayed over while my parents were out of town. I remember it being a Saturday morning just after breakfast. I was walking into the living room when I saw the rocking chair going by itself. I know my grandma kept the windows open because we didn't have AC or ceiling fans, but there was absolutely no way in hell that the wind was strong enough to make the chair move. It genuinely seemed like someone was sitting in it rocking back and forth. I asked my grandma to come look, and as soon as she walked in the room it stopped. There was another time we were visiting and a cousin of mine had recently passed away in a car accident. I remember waking up in the middle of the night after his memorial service and smelling his cologne throughout my grandparents' house. The smell was strong enough to wake up my grandparents, who were really close to him. I guess this isn't unsettling as much as it might be more comforting, but in my mind it was pretty creepy. In my second year as a new RN, I worked in a burn/trauma unit. We were pretty slow and had a low census. I guess people weren't getting burned that month. I sat in the back of the unit to catch up on some charting where there was no one around and a little more quiet time. All of a sudden I smelled fresh cautery/burning skin. I thought to myself, weird, we don't have any admissions and I didn't know he has a bleeder, when you use a cautery tool to burn the active bleeding vessel. I got up from my chair and walked around the unit trying to find the smell. It got weaker as I walked away from my computer. I stopped another nurse and asked if we had any bleeders, which she said no. Weird. I walked to the tub room area where we do dressing changes, lights off and no patients. I walked across to our special floor to see if anything is going on, nothing. Now it's getting super weird because I looked around the whole unit and every possible spot and the scent was gone. Thinking I was losing it, so I went back to my charting. Right when I sat down there it was again. Shit you not, it was like a 3 feet in diameter area right around where I'm sitting that smells like burning flesh. I jumped up in absolute fear. At that time my charge nurse and house supervisor turned the corner and saw me. Looking at the expression on my face, they immediately asked me what's going on. I told them the story and asked if they could come over and smell it. Sure enough, their faces went white and in disbelief. This was straight up the craziest thing I have ever experienced. Some of the women who worked on the unit didn't really seem surprised, they just said it was an old patient paying a visit. Creepy. I'm a little late to the party, but I'll just add this in. One night me and my high school best friend were meeting up to go do something, maybe a movie or something, maybe go to the high school, I don't remember. I drove to his house and we got in his car and started to leave the neighborhood. As we reached the exit we saw this really strange glowing light in the sky. We both pointed it out and started to talk about it, because it was quite large and very bright. We started to joke that it was a UFO, and that maybe the car radio would go fuzzy as it tried to communicate with us. At this point, our laughing is interrupted by the sound of the car radio going dead, and I look over to him to make sure he wasn't doing anything, but he did the same. I almost started crying and we both just said what the fuck and started to panic. Next thing we know, the radio comes back on right where it left off, but the light was gone. I was backpacking in Helsinki and heard about this old abandoned village outside of town that had been run down and in disrepair. I thought it would be cool to see what a bit of old, 50s or 60s, Helsinki looked like, so I went to check it out. It was deep in the woods and outside of cell range, so it was already a bit eerie, and the fact that not a person in the world knew where I was started to play on my mind. I kept walking past houses that were totally collapsed and hearing random noises that are typical of the woods, but finally I came upon a tree with a phrase carved into it, "Better squat than let houses rot." After that, each noise sounded like it could have been a person, and I thought, oh my god, there might be people living out here. I bailed. Fast. In retrospect, I wasn't really that far from civilization, but that phrase was haunting as shit. When I was probably 16 years old, I was babysitting my nephew while my older siblings and my parents went out to dinner. It was just my nephew and I alone in the house. He was about 2 or 3 at the time. I was in the kitchen cooking him dinner while he was sitting in his booster seat at the dining room table. I had told him earlier in the day that if he behaved, I would let him have a little sip of pop when he ate supper. So while I was waiting for his food to be done, I took a can of pop and a cup and set them on the table and walked back in the kitchen to get his food. I was standing at the counter in the kitchen and my back was to doorway to dining room. I was getting his food ready and all of a sudden I hear my nephew say, "Can one of you guys please open my pop for me?" I just kind of freeze for a second. No one else is supposed to be here. If it was a family member, they would have made themselves known. I turned around and through the doorway, I can see my nephew sitting at the dining room table, holding up the can of pop for someone to take and open for him. He's turned to his right like there's someone standing next to him, but there's nothing. He's just facing a wall. I just stand there for a second, shitting myself. Is someone in the house? Who TF is he talking to? The house is dead quiet. Eventually, I just sprint in the dining room, snatch my nephew out of the chair. I almost took his little legs off trying to get him out of the booster seat. We run upstairs and hide in my room till my family gets back. A lot of things like this happened when my nephew was little. I could go on and on. Hopefully just childhood imaginary friends. Shudder.